James, is it really necessary to drive quite so fast?
More often than you...
Pierce Brosnan is one of Hollywood's most iconic stars, but there's a secret he's kept hidden for years. For decades, he's never spoken about it, until now. In an emotional interview, Brosnan opens up about something he's kept locked away throughout his entire career. What is it that's been buried beneath the surface all these years? Join us as we look at Pierce Brosnan's untold story and uncover what he's been hiding all this time. A boy with no father and big dreams. Pierce Brosnan was born on May 16, 1953, in Drogheda, a small town in Ireland. His early life was full of challenges. His mother, May Smith, was just 19 years old when she gave birth to him. She had married Brosnan's father, Thomas Brosnan, only 9 months earlier. But the marriage didn't last. Thomas left the family when Pierce was still a baby. Brosnan later said he only met his father once, when he was 31. They had a cup of tea together, exchanged a few words, and then parted ways. He was a good whistler and had a good walk. "That's all I know about him," Pierce once said. That brief moment was all he ever really had of his father. After his father left, life got even harder. His mother had to make a painful decision. Wanting to give her son a better life, she moved to London to train as a nurse. Pierce was left behind in Ireland, where he lived with relatives. He didn't get to see his mother very often, maybe once or twice a year. It was a lonely and difficult time. Growing up without both parents made Pierce feel isolated, and in 1950s, Ireland, being from a broken family, was often looked down upon. He later shared how he longed for a sense of home and stability. When Pierce was 11 years old, everything changed. He moved to London to live with his mother and her new husband, William Carmichael. Adjusting to life in England wasn't easy. His Irish accent made him stand out in school. Other kids teased him and called him Irish. He struggled to fit in, but something positive came from that difficult period. William, his stepfather, treated Pierce kindly and helped him feel like part of a family. One day, William took young Pierce to the movies to see Goldfinger, a James Bond film starring Sean Connery. It was one of Pierce's earliest memories of having a father figure. That movie wasn't just an exciting experience, it left a deep mark on him. He didn't know it then, but that day planted a seed that would one day grow into something huge. Pierce Brosnan would grow up to play James Bond himself, becoming one of the most popular 007s in history. As a teenager, Pierce didn't dream of acting right away. At 16, he left school and planned to become a commercial artist. He enrolled at St. Martin's School of Art in London. He was good at drawing and had a creative eye, and for a while, this seemed like his path in life. But everything changed one day when he wandered into a small theater and saw a fire eater performing. That performance lit a spark in him. Something about it made him curious. It was bold, dramatic, and full of energy. He suddenly felt drawn to the world of performing. That spark led him to enroll in the Drama Centre London, one of the most respected acting schools in the UK. The school was known for being intense and demanding, and students were trained using a method-based approach. For Pierce, those years were transformative. He learned discipline, how to embody a character, and, most importantly, how to find his voice as an actor. The experience wasn't just about learning lines, it was about discovering who he was and what he could do. He later said it gave him freedom and a way to express himself, something he had longed for since his lonely childhood. After graduating in 1975, Brosnan began working in theater. His big break came when he was cast in the British premiere of The Red Devil Battery Sign, a play by the legendary Tennessee Williams. Williams was so impressed by Brosnan's performance that he sent him a telegram saying, "Thank God for you, my dear boy." It was a huge moment for the young actor. Praise from someone like Williams gave him confidence that he was on the right path. Not long after, Brosnan appeared in a few more theater productions and small TV roles. But the turning point in his career came in 1982 when he landed the lead role in the TV series Remington Steel. The show was a hit. It told the story of a mysterious and charming con man who pretends to be a detective teaming up with a smart female investigator. Brosnan's character was smooth, clever, and always well-dressed. Viewers loved him. He had a natural mix of wit, style, and presence that made him stand out on screen. Remington Steel ran until 1987 and gave Brosnan international fame. It also shaped how people saw him, as polished, confident, and magnetic. These were the same qualities that would later make him perfect for James Bond. But long before he ever wore the famous tuxedo,
The name's Bond. James Bond.
it was clear Pierce Brosnan had found his calling. And just when his career was heating up, Hollywood came calling with the role that had once slipped through his fingers. A missed destiny. In 1986, Pierce Brosnan was just days away from becoming James Bond. After years of working hard and building his reputation, the moment he had dreamed about since childhood was finally within reach. The producers of the Bond films had noticed his performance in the hit TV series Remington Steel. His charm, looks, and confidence made him the perfect choice to take over the iconic role of 007. Everything seemed to be going his way. Brosnan had even gone through a screen test with a full Bond-style setup. He wore the tuxedo, held the famous gun, and gave a performance that impressed everyone. Behind the scenes, the Bond team was ready to announce him as the new James Bond. He was only a few days away from signing the contract and being introduced to the world as the next face of the franchise. But then, something unexpected happened. Just before the official announcement, NBC, the network behind Remington Steel, made a last-minute decision. They had previously canceled the show due to falling ratings. However, the news that Brosnan was about to become James Bond suddenly made the show popular again. People were interested in seeing him on screen. As a result, NBC decided to bring Remington Steel back for a short season. Because of his contract, Brosnan was legally required to return to the show. The Bond producers couldn't wait for him. They didn't want James Bond to be confused with a TV character. So, they quickly moved on and offered the role to Timothy Dalton instead. For Brosnan, it was a painful moment. He later described it as heartbreaking. He had worked so hard, and just when it was finally going to happen, the opportunity was taken away. Watching someone else play Bond, knowing how close he had come, was difficult. But he didn't give up. He kept acting, kept improving, and stayed patient. He knew that if the chance came again, he would be ready. 8 years later, in 1994, that chance finally returned. This time, there were no contracts in the way. The Bond producers once again saw that Brosnan was the right man for the job. Timothy Dalton had stepped down after 2 Bond films, and the search for a new 007 led back to Pierce Brosnan. This time, nothing could stop it. When Brosnan was officially named as the new James Bond in 1994, it was a huge moment, not just for him, but for the Bond franchise. He was 41 years old and had the perfect mix of maturity, elegance, and energy. Speaking about it later, Brosnan said, "It felt like a circle closing. The role he had almost lost forever was finally his. The years of waiting had made him stronger, and now he was ready to step into one of the most famous roles in movie history. What came next was a Bond like no one had seen before. Cool, confident, and ready for a new era. The Golden Age of Bond. When GoldenEye hit theaters in 1995, James Bond had been gone from the big screen for 6 years. The last film, License to Kill with Timothy Dalton, had come out in 1989. Since then, many people wondered if Bond still had a place in the modern world. The Cold War had ended. The action genre had changed. and audiences were used to new kinds of heroes. Some critics believed the Bond series was outdated, stuck in the past. But GoldenEye changed everything. Pierce Brosnan brought Bond back to life.
Well, it seemed the right size for the space.
Or maybe you were bored with it.
His version of 007 was fresh and modern, but still carried the classic charm and style that fans loved. He was confident and calm under pressure, but he also showed emotion and vulnerability. This balance gave his Bond more depth. Critics praised him for bringing new life to the role without trying to copy the actors before him. He didn't try to be Sean Connery or Roger Moore. He was simply Pierce Brosnan, and it worked. At the box office, GoldenEye was a huge success. It earned $356 million worldwide, a massive number at the time. It became the fourth highest-grossing film of 1995 and made more money than all of the 1980s Bond films. Brosnan's Bond was a hit with both critics and audiences, proving that the character could still thrive in a changing world. Following the success of GoldenEye, Brosnan returned as 007 in Tomorrow Never Dies. This time, Bond faced a new type of villain, a media mogul who used news headlines to manipulate world events. The idea felt fresh and even ahead of its time, with themes of fake news and media power. But Tomorrow Never Dies faced a big challenge. It was released just 1 week after Titanic, one of the biggest films in movie history. Many assumed Bond would be overshadowed, but Brosnan proved his staying power. The film still made $333 million worldwide and turned a major profit for the studio. It showed that Bond could survive even in a competitive box office environment. In this film, Brosnan really began to blend the classic Bond style with more modern action. His 007 was still elegant and smooth, but now he was also faster, tougher, and more intense. The action scenes were bold and exciting, and Brosnan handled them with confidence. The film's Bond girl, Michelle Yeoh, was also different. Her character, Wai Lin, wasn't just there to be rescued, she was Bond's equal in every way. Smart, skilled, and tough, she gave the film a fresh dynamic. 2 years later, in 1999, Brosnan returned for his third film, The World Is Not Enough. This movie took the franchise in a slightly darker and more emotional direction. It explored deeper themes, including betrayal, trust, and personal pain. The film's main villain, Elektra King, played by Sophie Marceau, was complex and unpredictable. She was the first main female villain in the Bond series, and her relationship with Bond added emotional weight to the story. The film also included one of the longest and most exciting opening sequences in Bond history.
There's a drop in occasionally. Shoot in and out.
It's very different now.
A high-speed boat chase on the River Thames. Brosnan delivered one of his strongest performances as Bond, showing not only physical strength but also emotional conflict. He was no longer just a spy. He was a man dealing with pain, loss, and betrayal. Despite some criticism for Denise Richards' role as a nuclear scientist, The World Is Not Enough still earned $361 million globally. It proved that Brosnan's Bond had real staying power and could keep the series evolving. Then came Die Another Day in 2002, the 20th Bond film and the 40th anniversary of the franchise. Expectations were high and the movie delivered a lot of excitement. Die Another Day became Brosnan's highest-grossing Bond film, making nearly $432 million worldwide. It was a massive commercial success, but it also marked a turning point. Many fans and critics felt that the film had pushed things too far. The overuse of CGI, the unrealistic gadgets, and some of the writing were seen as signs that the series was losing its balance between style and substance. Brosnan had reached the peak of his success as Bond, but behind the scenes, the tone was starting to shift. The franchise was ready for another change. But just when it seemed like Brosnan's Bond era was unstoppable, Hollywood had a surprise that would change everything. The Secret Betrayal. After 4 hugely successful James Bond films, Pierce Brosnan believed he was coming back for a 5th. So did the rest of the world. His last movie, Die Another Day, had become the highest-grossing Bond film at the time, making nearly $432 million worldwide. Brosnan had helped bring the franchise back to life with GoldenEye and kept it going strong for nearly a decade. Everything pointed to a 5th adventure as 007. The public loved him. The media loved him. And most importantly, the producers seemed to love him too. During press tours for Die Another Day in 2002, both Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson, the longtime Bond producers, had praised his performance. They said they were excited to keep working with him. Brosnan left those interviews confident he would be back. But then something strange happened. After all the praise and success, there was silence. No news, no updates. Brosnan, like the fans, was left waiting. He assumed the studio was just taking its time with the development. After all, it had always taken a few years between Bond films, but behind the scenes, things were shifting. The studio was considering a new direction for the franchise, and Brosnan's name was quietly being pushed aside. In July 2004, while filming After the Sunset in the Bahamas, Brosnan received the call that changed everything. He was staying at the home of Richard Harris, a close friend who had passed away 2 years earlier. It was a quiet place, full of memories and reflection. And now, it became the setting for one of the most painful moments of Brosnan's career. The call came from his agents. They told him that negotiations for the next Bond film had stopped. The studio wasn't moving forward. They didn't say exactly why. They just told him they're not quite sure what they want to do. They'll call you next Thursday. That vague message left Brosnan confused and uneasy. But what followed was even more emotional. Shortly after, he spoke directly to the producers. Barbara Broccoli was the first to speak. She had been one of his biggest supporters for years, even fighting to cast him back in 1994 when others doubted him. Now, her voice was filled with emotion. She was crying. Through tears, she told Brosnan it was over. He would not be returning as James Bond. Then came Michael G. Wilson. He was calm, professional, and brief. "You were a great James Bond," he said. "Thank you very much." That was it. After 4 films, $1 billion in box office revenue, and a decade of dedication, Brosnan was quietly dismissed. Later, in interviews, Brosnan described his reaction in a few painful words. "I was utterly shocked and just kicked to the curb. It wasn't just about losing a role, it was about how it was handled. There was no proper goodbye, no real explanation. He wasn't told he had done anything wrong. He had delivered record-breaking numbers and helped save the franchise, but in the end, it didn't seem to matter." The decision left fans stunned as well. Many had assumed Brosnan would return for a 5th and final film, giving him a proper send-off. Instead, there was silence from the studio, followed months later by the announcement that a new Bond had been cast, Daniel Craig. In the years that followed, Brosnan slowly began to speak more openly about what had happened. He made it clear that he had wanted to continue. He even joked that he would have played Bond for a 5th, maybe even a 6th time if they had asked, but he wasn't bitter in the traditional sense. He didn't blame Craig, who he praised for doing an excellent job. His disappointment was aimed at the people who made the decision without giving him a chance to say goodbye properly. Brosnan later criticized the studio, calling their decision unimaginative and lacking courage. He felt they had played it safe by cutting him loose instead of exploring new ground with a Bond actor who had already proven his success. He didn't see himself as too old for the role, and neither did many fans. He believed he still had something to give, but Hollywood had made up its mind. For Brosnan, it was a lesson in how quickly things can change in the film industry. One moment you're being praised as the perfect Bond, and the next, you're quietly replaced. Still, he chose to handle it with grace. While he admitted the decision hurt, He didn't let it break him. Looking back, Brosnan later said, "I do not let regret come into my world. It just leads to more misery and more regrets." Instead of letting the rejection define him, he used it as motivation to move forward. He began taking on new roles, exploring different characters, and proving to the world and to himself that he was more than just 007. He also admitted that part of him had to kill Bond inside himself to move on. The role had become such a big part of his identity that stepping away was like letting go of a piece of himself. But once he did, a new chapter began. What came next for Brosnan would surprise everyone and prove that he didn't need a tuxedo or a license to kill to shine. Finding himself after Bond. When Pierce Brosnan's time as James Bond came to an end, it left a deep mark on him. For nearly 10 years, he had been known around the world as 007. The character had brought him fame and success, but also pressure and expectations. Once it was over, Brosnan had to figure out who he was without the tuxedo, the gadgets, and the label of Bond. In his own words, he had to kill off Bond to move forward. His first step was to take risks, big ones. In 2005, he starred in The Matador, a dark comedy that turned everything audiences expected from him upside down. Instead of playing a smooth, heroic figure, Brosnan played Julian Noble, a worn-out, messy, and deeply insecure hitman. Julian wore loud shirts, drank too much, and wandered around hotel lobbies in his underwear. It was the total opposite of Bond. This bold choice paid off. Critics loved the performance, calling it brave, funny, and honest. Brosnan received a Golden Globe nomination for Best Actor. It was the first major sign that he could break away from the Bond image and succeed as something entirely new. More importantly, it showed that he wasn't afraid to laugh at himself or challenge the public's idea of who he was. In 2006, he took another turn with Seraphim Falls, a gritty post-Civil War drama where he played a hunted man trying to survive in harsh wilderness. The film was quiet, serious, and stripped of glamour. Brosnan's character hardly spoke at times, letting emotion come through his face and body language instead. It was a raw and emotional performance that proved he could carry a film without the help of explosions or charm. Around this time, Brosnan also began to build more control over his career. Back in the late 1990s, while still playing Bond, he had co-founded a production company called Irish Dreamtime. After leaving the 007 role, he leaned into this even more. He began producing films he believed in, giving himself a way to explore roles and stories Hollywood might not usually offer him. This move gave him both freedom and creative power. Then, in 2008, Pierce Brosnan did something no one expected. He sang. In Mamma Mia, the big screen adaptation of the hit ABBA musical, Brosnan joined a star-studded cast that included Meryl Streep, Colin Firth, and Amanda Seyfried. The film was full of joy, color, dancing, and, of course, lots of singing. Brosnan played Sam Carmichael, one of the three possible fathers of Streep's character's daughter. It was romantic, silly, lighthearted, and completely different from anything he'd done before. And when the film hit theaters, audiences loved it. But not everyone loved his singing. In fact, Brosnan's musical numbers were often mocked, and clips of his performance quickly became internet memes. Some critics joked that he sang like he was in pain, but Brosnan took it all in stride. He didn't let the teasing bother him. He later joked that he sounded like a wounded raccoon and said he had the time of his life doing it anyway. And the numbers backed him up. Mamma Mia made over $600 million at the global box office. It became one of the highest-grossing musical films of all time and introduced a new generation to both ABBA and Pierce Brosnan. It proved that joy, heart, and nostalgia could outshine technical perfection. In 2018, Brosnan returned for Mamma Mia. Here We Go Again, the sequel that continued the story of Donna and her family. Once again, he sang. Once again, he was teased. And once again, the film was a hit. By now, Brosnan had become part of musical movie history. He wasn't just Bond anymore. He was a full-blown pop culture icon. But even as he sang his heart out in Greek island sunsets, Pierce Brosnan had one more side of himself to reveal. Something deeper, more personal, and rooted in love. Love and loss. Pierce Brosnan's life off-screen has been shaped just as much by loss and heartbreak as by success and fame. Behind the charm and polished smile lies a man who has lived through deep personal pain and who has also found healing, joy, and strength through love and family. His story of love and grief begins with Cassandra Harris. Pierce met Cassandra in 1977. She was an Australian actress with a striking presence and a kind heart. More importantly, she had a calming effect on Brosnan, who was still trying to find his place in the acting world. She was older, experienced, and wise. Cassandra had 2 children from a previous marriage, Charlotte and Christopher, and Brosnan quickly stepped into a father role. They became a family. The 2 married in 1980, and it was clear from the beginning how much they meant to each other. Brosnan often called Cassandra his North Star. She believed in him and supported his career from the start. In fact, it was Cassandra who unknowingly helped plant the seeds of his future as James Bond. In 1981, while filming the Bond movie For Your Eyes Only, where she played Countess Liesl von Schlaff, she introduced Brosnan to producer Albert R. Cubby Broccoli. That meeting would eventually lead to Brosnan's casting as 007 more than a decade later. But their time together was marked by tragedy. In 1987, Cassandra was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, the same disease that had taken her mother's life. The years that followed were filled with hospital visits, surgeries, and treatments. Brosnan stood by her side through all of it. He described it as one of the hardest periods of his life. In interviews, he has said that watching someone you love fade away, slowly and painfully, leaves a permanent mark on your soul. On December 28, 1991, Cassandra passed away. She was just 43 years old. Brosnan was heartbroken. He lost not only his wife, but also his best friend, the person who had helped him become the man he was. It was a loss that would stay with him forever. After her death, Brosnan legally adopted Charlotte and Christopher. He raised them as his own, trying to give them the love and stability they had lost. It was not easy. Grief doesn't leave quickly, and for years he carried the weight of it in quiet moments. But he kept moving forward for his children and for himself. Then, in 1994, something unexpected happened. Pierce met Keely Shea Smith, an American journalist and environmental activist. What began as a quiet romance grew into something strong and lasting. Keely brought laughter and peace back into Brosnan's life. They married in 2001 in Ireland, surrounded by friends, family, and nature, a setting that meant everything to both of them. Together, Pierce and Keely had 2 sons, Dylan and Paris. From the start, Brosnan was committed to being a present, loving father. He spoke often about how much family meant to him, especially after all he had lost. In an interview, he once said, "I want my children to know love. That's all I care about." It wasn't about money or fame. It was about making sure they felt supported and safe. But life continued to test him. In 2013, more than 20 years after losing Cassandra, Brosnan faced another unbearable loss. His adopted daughter Charlotte also died of ovarian cancer, the same illness that had taken her mother. She was just 41 years old. Brosnan was devastated. He had to relive a tragedy he thought he had already endured. It was a cruel reminder of how fragile life can be. He threw himself into his charitable work. Brosnan and Keely have been active environmental advocates, working to protect marine life and support sustainable causes. Giving back has become part of his healing process, a way to use his platform for something meaningful. If you enjoyed this revelation, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next.